Cool. So we're just meeting, and both of us have spent a lot of time thinking about and working on USD stables. But Yele has actually done quite a lot of work between companies he's run and experiences at Binance, especially with US stablecoins in Africa. And the goal here is kind of having a conversation about why are US dollar stablecoins so popular, who's using them, why are they using them, and I think Yele's had like hands-on experience both kind of driving the adoption of them and also personally recognizing those use cases, and so going to lean a lot on Yele's experiences there. And just to kind of give like a really brief starter of like the context of how big stablecoins are, I think one of the most kind of staggering stats is that even though stablecoins today only make up in market cap only 10% of the current total cryptocurrency industry's market cap, more than 70% of all volume across the entire industry is done through stablecoins. So even though it's not the most valuable part of the entire industry, although it is rising, it's by far the most dominant in terms of actual volume moving through it. And one really crazy stat is that that number of how much volume is around $11 trillion in 2022, and it's already rising a lot more this year, which is on the same ballpark as
Mhm.
PayPal and the Visa network. PayPal actually is 1.5 trillion, and Visa's at like nearly 12 trillion. So stablecoins are not just like some cool tech that's starting to grow in its early days. Stablecoins are already an extremely large market. So Yele, maybe do you want to tell us a bit first about yourself, about your experiences kind of seeing the need for US dollar stablecoins, and then about your background in helping the adoption with them at Binance?
Sure. So it's good to be here. I'm Yele, uh, co-founder of Onboard. I've been working in crypto since 2017, and I joined Binance in 2018 as a director for Binance Labs, where I led investments for into sort of like African crypto companies. So invested in companies like Yellow Card, Bitsika, Raise, Buycoins, and then also founded Bundle, which was a company incubated in the Binance ecosystem that provided sort of really simple sort of buy and sell crypto functionality for Africans, scaled out to about 1.1 million plus users. Um, and with Onboard, what we're trying to do right now is to essentially give people that same kind of custodial wallet experience, but in self custody, and the ability to go from stable coins to your bank account or mobile money without having to go through a centralized exchange. Um, in terms of sort of, the adoption of stable coins, I think that, you know, what people don't understand, first of all, is, we're living in countries or markets whereby we see the local currency losing value against the dollar every single year, right? So, for instance, at this time in 18 months ago, one naira was about $1 was 660 naira. Right now, $1 is about 1,300. So it's seen almost like a 50% devaluation, or decrease in value in about 18 months. And so for a lot of people, we're very aware of the fact that like our currencies are losing value. Number two, it's also very difficult to get access to USD. So you can't go to a bank and get the right volume that you want to buy, whether it's for your own personal needs or it's for your business. If you have USD outside of, like, maybe you get paid as a remote worker, if you try to bring that into the country and convert that into local currency, you get given a worse rate. So what has happened is that stable coins have kind of created an open market for USD, because you have USD on chain, and it's created this almost like an open banking like platform whereby exchanges, financial services companies are building wallets that take advantage of this open banking USD on chain and building useful tools. So we're seeing it sort of like adoption on the retail side. We're seeing adoption on the sort of business side. In fact, the biggest drivers or like the largest volumes or use cases come from business adoption. So it's really impressive and just amazing to see how far and how fast the adoption has been. And I think like we're only just getting started.
No, that's crazy. And can you explain a bit about the visceral experience? You said like business use cases are like one of the biggest ones. Like, what exactly are folks doing? Who are they moving money to? Where are they getting it from? And like, what apps are they using? What's the actual like experience of leveraging stablecoins?
Yeah. So I mean, the biggest drivers are I would say exchanges, as well as like wallets. So, for instance, if you looked at the download data for Trust Wallet in Nigeria, for instance, versus Binance, I think Binance had about maybe 3.8 million downloads. Trust Wallet has
Mhm.
4.9, right? So you're seeing sort of like self custody growing even faster than custodial products. And that's actually because for a lot of people, the way they access stable coins is very peer to peer. So sometimes people don't even go on an exchange to access it, but let's say I have, Ghana CD or like Nigerian Naira, and I'm like, I want to save in USD. Now, I know you, Liam, as a friend, or someone has introduced me as a trusted broker. What happens is you would give me your bank account. I would send you Naira to your bank account or Ghana City to your bank account. And then you who have access to like Binance or a Yellow Card or a Quidax or any of these local platforms would then send me the USD C or T to my Trust wallet. So, in fact, most people who have USD stablecoins today, a lot of them have never actually been on a traditional kind of like
Mhm.
custodial platform, right? Which I think a lot of people don't really realize. But the biggest use cases really are sort of remittances and cross-border payments, right? And that's because you have a lot of economies that have two exchange rates, whereby the official kind of like bank rate is never the real market value of the currency, right? And so if I was given, let's say, um, $100 because I did like some work somewhere, and if I went to a bank, the bank was going to give me 50% or 80% of the actual value. I don't want to do that, right? And so I would use stable coins because if I'd use stable coins, I would get the real value. I would get value like a lot faster because I don't need to wait for like, T plus two or T plus three. And, I'm able to keep that within my own sort of like control because a lot of people have fears of the fact that, and this is not unfounded. Sometimes people have had money in a USD account and they're not able to withdraw the full balance. And, so people sometimes are kind of worried about that and they'll rather just keep the money in in stable coins because they know that, okay, if I'm holding 1,000 or 500 or $30, I can always have full access to
Mhm.
that amount of money. So that's kind of like what we're seeing on the retail side. One is you have people who are aware of the currency devaluations and are looking for a way to just preserve wealth or value. The other is sort of like as a sort of remote digital workers that are earning USD and prefer to be
Mhm.
paid in stable coins. And then also, if you are doing remittances as well, like you would use stable coins because you would get a better rate faster. So these are kind of like the retail use
That makes
cases.
sense. So there's a kind of a variety of use cases between like remittances and payments, and then also trying to store as a store of value because of the naira is kind of constantly inflating. And one thing that you stood out to me what you just said is that a lot of folks that are using these coins are not, I never perhaps ever have been onboarded via like Binance or a traditional centralized exchange. Can you explain a bit more to that about
Hmm.
that to folks that maybe are not as don't intuit that as well? What are the companies, and I know that you're helping start one here. Like what are the companies that are kind of riding this wave? And you think it's the case that Binance is kind of acting as like an onboarding partner in a sense to people to start holding these coins, getting familiar with it, and maybe Binance won't matter as much into the future? Or do you think Binance will continue to play a large role going forward?
Got it. So I think like um, definitely Binance is one of the uh, largest players, and that's just because you know a lot of people are kind of thinking about Africa right now. But in 2018, 2017, there wasn't really a lot of like global players looking at Africa, and you had a few local indigenous exchanges, right? So you had P2P platforms like um, Paxful, Remitano, local Bitcoins. They were like the initial set of sort of companies that people used to use to access to buy Bitcoin or like USDT at that particular time. Um, then I would say after Binance came in, you then also began to have like more local indigenous players, right? So initially Binance didn't have like the on and off ramps. So the local exchanges were able to integrate directly into with local fiat channels, so bank transfers, mobile money, and so you had this proliferation of players. So in Ghana you have like Bitika, in Kenya you have like Honeycoin, in Nigeria you have like um, Quidax, Busha, Bitcoins, Bitnob. Then you also have like players that have been able to scale beyond just one
Hmm.
particular country, right? So Luno, for instance, have not just scaled across Africa, but they're in a bunch of emerging markets
Hmm.
like Southeast Asia. Yellow Card, which is was one of the companies we backed whilst I was at Binance. They have about access to about 10 different markets, right? And so you have this, unlike, let's say, the US, for instance, whereby, it's primarily like maybe two or three players. In Africa, it's like very, very, very fragmented and very sort of like, um, it's Binance is sort of like the market leader, but you do have a bunch of other players playing in the space as well.
That makes sense. And once folks kind of start, adopting this and they're holding coins, there's kind of two directions I think that are interesting to look at. One is the degree to which the existing crypto space is supporting those users. For example, I know a lot of them actually are on holding their coins. The coins are resting on Tron if they're using Tether as a huge percentage of them. um, and the cryptocurrency industry building products for those holders. But then there's also the other direction where perhaps those users are actually going to start exploring Web3 applications, DeFi, and other things like that. I guess I'm curious your opinion on both. Like, what do you think the cryptocurrency industry could be doing better to kind of to serve the needs of folks now that are holding, whether it's Tether on Tron or USDC on another chain? And then in the other direction, what do you think those folks now that are holding coins effectively in wallets or have the ability to start using dApps and things like that, do you think they're going to, or do you think they're not going to?
I mean, I think that's a fantastic question actually, and it's something that I think about every day. I think that what stablecoins are, like I said, they're an open financial platform, right? So if we were to think of the Web2 world, it's like imagine Apple Pay, right? Or Google Pay, or Google Wallet or Apple Wallet, whereby you've taken money from your bank account and you've put it into this closed ecosystem. Now, developers and sort of like startups or companies can decide to build a whole host of applications. One vertical of applications are financial applications. Now, in the Web2 world, those financial applications are kind of geo-fenced in a way, right? So I'm in Nigeria or in the UK, I can't use Venmo, right? I can use M-Pesa in Kenya, but somebody in London cannot use M-Pesa, right? So, but in the Web3 world, if I build a financial application for USDC or USDT, anybody that has that stablecoin can use my application, right? And
Hmm.
so I do think that there will be a group of developers, and I fall into that category that are focused on saying, okay, how do we create world-class financial services that, it doesn't, your location doesn't sort of matter, your ability to access that, right? But then it's not just about financial services. People want to sort of have fun and play and do a bunch of
Hmm.
different things. And I think one of the most interesting things that I'm seeing, with the rise of like, less DeFi focused chains like Base is like this exploration of like just fun on-chain activities, right? So it kind of reminds me of what the early internet will have felt like when people were just kind of discovering a whole host of different websites.
Hmm.
And so I think like both worlds would exist simultaneously. However, the biggest elephant in the room in a lot of emerging markets is like USDT and Tron,
Hmm.
right? Because Tron, for instance, doesn't, I mean, has a smart contracts, but it's not an EVM chain. And it doesn't have the same kind of like focus, or like you don't have a lot of developers who would say they're like Tron developers and are building like dApps on Tron. Um, so the question then is, how do you bridge or bring users who are holding stable coins on Tron into sort of like the sort of Ethereum and Web3 ecosystem, and what does that look like? And so that's definitely something that I'm very curious to see how that plays out. It's kind of like, I think of Tron as like BBM, right? So if you
Hmm.
think of
Yeah.
BlackBerry, the key application was Messenger, and even though they had an app store, it was like quite limited. And then you had like Apple launch, and then you know you had WhatsApp, and because it was just a better developer platform, you had just a much more thriving and active ecosystem. And so people over time kind of moved from holding Blackberries to like Apple and Android. So I use that analogy when I think of like
No,
Tron and
I
Ethereum
actually
instead
I
of
really
the
love that analogy. Like I don't know if you know this, but I'm from Waterloo, Ontario, where BlackBerry started, and so I used BBM, and so did all my friends in high school because the whole city used it. Um, and actually, there's a great movie out now about history of BlackBerry. And it's called BlackBerry, where they say
yeah.
that's Waterloo is where the vampires live. And actually, I was looking for a Halloween costume idea, so I'm glad that you brought that up. Um, Okay, that makes a lot of sense. One really specific question that's maybe relevant to a lot of developers here is when you're getting folks onboarded onto holding stable coins, how do they think about when you said there's a lot of B2B payments, remittances, they're moving money between each other. How do they address each other? Because I know a lot of folks, they have a Tron address, like their Binance wallet's Tron address is something that they can share. They might say, "Hey, send me money at TRX, blah blah blah." Is that how you do it, or do you do it in a different way?
Hmm. No, I mean it's the same thing, right? Like it's people just share like their addresses. I know folks have tried to build different things, but I haven't seen any sort of solution take off like that crazily. And that's just because like it's not quite the same as like
Hmm.
email, right? So it's like PayPal was a closed loop network, and it allowed people to send
Yeah.
money over the internet, right? But this comes by default. So it's like, how do you create that closed? How do
Yeah,
you create sort of like that ecosystem? Right? So
I
yeah.
think actually it would be interesting for developers, and I thought about this, but I don't know how exactly to do it. To maybe is there a way to do Tron addressing on Ethereum, where if someone sends you a Tron address, you could send it to their Tron address on Ethereum? Like that might be an interesting kind of hack to onboard
Mm.
folks. And actually, that interesting kind of segue here is I saw recently that David Marcus launched. He was the creator of he ran Messenger at Facebook. Now he runs Lightspark. He just launched. I think it's called UMA, Universal
Oh my,
something
you,
something, but it's like they use an email address type format. So that's the question I wanted to ask
yeah,
around that, in addition to your thoughts on that. But the question I want to ask it around it is, the original vision of Bitcoin was basically this, like global peer-to-peer digital cash, that was, separated from the state. And ironically, we've created this kind of peer-to-peer cash that's controlled by this company Tether that no one really understands and is kind of the definition of an opaque central bank. But what's your take on that? Why aren't we using Bitcoin, and how did this all kind of emerge as opposed to, maybe Bitcoin's original vision?
yeah. You know, I hope this doesn't come across as like what's the word now, controversial, but I think that um, because Bitcoin has a capped supply, right, and is like the most popular crypto assets, right? You have this very basic kind of economic rule of demand and supply. So if you have an asset that has a fixed supply and the demand and awareness continues to grow year on year, like the price over time would continue to increase. And we've heard stories of people, I think the most famous one is the guy that bought like two pizzas for 10,000
Hmm.
Bitcoins. Like
Hmm.
nobody wants to sell, nobody wants to buy, you know, $1 million worth of burgers or chicken and chips, you know, like today and like just hate themselves for doing that,
Yeah,
right? So
there's a
that
fear of
has
using it
made
almost.
Bitcoin become yeah, exactly. That has made Bitcoin become like digital gold, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And stable coins have kind of stepped in to sort of solve that initial problem, but for sure it's still connected to sort of the you know real world in terms of like it being dollar backed, right? But then that's also
Hmm.
why I'm excited about things like DAI or like flat coins that
Hmm.
are not necessarily backed by sort of real world assets, but I think those would also grow slowly over time, right? So
Hmm. Hmm.
people need stepping stones to kind of go from like 0 to 1, right? So
Hmm.
if stable coins are like the main on ramp that gets people into the on-chain economy, people then believe and say, okay, you know what? I want to do, I want something that is like not necessarily tied to like the USD, and is fully on chain, and decentralized. Then they can decide to hold DAI or hold like some of the flat coins that are coming out, right? But
Hmm.
I think at the end of the day, the beauty of like our industry is that the market kind of decides what the winners ends up being, right? So as a builder, and it's
Hmm.
something I tell myself all the time, is like I should just focus on what like our customers want and try to deliver value for people,
Hmm.
right? So even though I
Yeah.
have very strong ideologies about what I would love to see in the space, I also kind of follow what users want. Like that's like my number one mantra: make something people want.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I saw, I think Dan Romero tweeted the other day that like one of the hardest problems to do in crypto is just actively grow like kind of a user base that uses whatever your product is every single day. And a lot of folks in crypto tend to kind of ignore that, and focus a bit more on, you know, ideological decentralization technologies, or on things that don't actually end up getting used every day. And I think it's like good that's like your focus area. But actually, kind of like maybe a final question here, is in doing so, you're going to run up against that exact dilemma effectively. It's just like to what extent you lean on decentralized technologies versus the more centralized approach. And you also mentioned, you're kind of building a custodial wallet. I'm curious around how you see both the regulation around that developing, because, obviously, like a self-custodial wallet perhaps is not regulated, at least in the United States, for instance. Like it's not a money transmission business or money service business. It's just a wallet, just software, and so you can maybe scale faster. But if you're doing the custodial approach, it's you have to kind of be a bit more careful. How do you think about navigating the regulation around building a wallet like this?
Yeah. So just a correction, we're building a self custody
Ah,
wallet.
okay,
So
okay.
my previous company was a custodial wallet, and I think that is kind of in line with what
Hmm.
you've said in that um, at the end of the day, if these things are financial assets, securities or not, they're financial assets, and you're holding custody of those assets. Um, as we have more regulatory clarity, I do think that custodial crypto or digital asset service providers are going to be regulated very similar to
Hmm.
financial institutions, and that means that that takes away the borderlessness nature because now you have to be thinking about regulation from hundreds of countries from across
Hmm.
the world, right? And I think like we've also seen what can happen when crypto isn't
Hmm.
regulated, right? So I give an example of let's say SVB and FTX,
Hmm.
right? So Silicon Valley Bank was sort of FDIC insured bank, and when they ran into some troubles, the government stepped in and sort of backstopped
Hmm.
the losses, right? And then FTX has been a year, and we're still trying to figure out
Yeah.
like what the outcomes will be. So in a way, if we're to create a ladder of like sort of let's use it like Satoshi's hierarchy of financial security. At the top is like sort of like
Hmm.
self custody. Then you have sort of regulated TradFi, and then to me at the bottom of the food chain is like custodial, unregulated
Uh-huh.
custodial crypto, right? Because as long as you have humans in the picture, you're gonna have one bad apple or one bad actor that tries to take advantage of the sort of the goodness of
Right.
the rest of
Right.
people, right? And that's just unfortunately what human nature is. And so I do think that regulation would actually end up pushing us as an industry back towards kind of what Satoshi envisioned, which is, a decentralized, open, transparent financial system. And Vitalik and the Ethereum community have sort of extended that into like an open and transparent sort of application um, um, sort of platform, right? And so I generally think that like crypto would sort of bifurcate into these two worlds of like regulated crypto that is compliant, focused on sort of like security of users, and then sort of self-custody crypto that is peer-to-peer on chain, defined by smart contracts. So in the regulated crypto world, regulation essentially protects customers. In the self-custody world, smart
Hmm.
contracts and sort of the open nature protects customers. And that I think is kind of how I see or how I believe, the crypto industry
Yep.
will evolve.
That makes a lot of sense, and I completely agree. And I think also that it's been the case that as developers have built better and better and better um, technologies to make it easy to do self-custody. Like these days, you can store you can use like your passkey on your phone as your private key. That increases the bar of how high quality like the experience has to be for any centralized competitor. And if it gets to the point where like it's just better to use the decentralized version, then I think we've succeeded as a space. Um, I know that we're kind of past the half
I
hour
agree.
mark, so I'm going to say thanks very much. I actually I want to keep talking for a lot longer. I hope we can do that afterwards. But maybe just before we go, do you want to just share
For
a kind
sure.
of quick note about how people could either get in touch with you or learn more about you and your company?
Sure. So on Twitter, it's Yele Bademosi. So at YeleBademosi. And then it's onboard wallet. So like onboarding to Web3. So ONBOARD wallet. And yeah, if you're interested in sort of a protocol on that is building peer-to-peer global on and off ramps for people in sort of frontier and emerging markets on L2s. Would love to chat. We're out of beta and sort of rapidly expanding into as many countries as possible. So yeah, looking to build a
Sweet.
community.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's sort of just continue to improve like the UX. So right now, stablecoin still feels like it doesn't feel like fintech is probably the place whereby user experience and sort of like financial services working really well. So the bar is quite high. And so when you introduce stablecoins and is competing against sort of fintech 1.0 that is like already really quite good, then we need to do things that the UX works and the applications are just like really amazing. So I spend a lot of my time trying to think about like what use cases do we need to create that fintech can't just replicate, right? And that way users are coming because they're like, wow, I have this financial problem that I can't get in the real world without this sort of amazing use case that I'm getting on chain. And within the context of Africa, like the thing I'm very bullish on is credit, right? Like I think that you know Africa and a lot of emerging markets do not have credit, and the US is highly dependent, and like, the US economy is dependent on credit. So that's something that we can't solve in the traditional manner. And I do think like an open sort of credit economy on chain is going to be one of the biggest sort of use cases that I'm excited about.
Yeah, I guess I think it's important to kind of understand the macro way in which stablecoins fit into the picture here. And it's not necessarily the stablecoins are like an application of blockchain necessarily. I think it's more important to think of them as like a bridge from the real world uh, into the blockchain world. Um, and then, once you're in the blockchain world, there's lots of things you can do, but it's almost like a bridge. And so if you're building something that's purely only makes sense in the blockchain universe, thinking about it as almost like a technological backend that's going to be used by people that are going to be bridging into the system. So, for instance, um, a lot of folks now are kind of starting to work on account abstraction wallets or better wallets in general for people to use, say, DeFi or NFTs. I think it's going to be really, really important to think of what you're building is not just purely for the blockchain user base, but also for everybody else that's getting into
Mm,
this space that maybe doesn't have any idea what those things are. And one of the best examples I've seen recently has been a company that's just been doing a really dead simple Venmo like mobile app where you can sign in with a pass key and it's just literally send. There's a simple naming scheme, and they're not just trying to target this at people that are already using, say, ENS names and that are at crypto conferences. They're trying to get people that might be in Nigeria or might be in any other country that need to do remittances or something like that, and market it as a product that's just cheaper, faster, better than any existing remittance product out there. So making sure that you know who is your customer exactly, and are you thinking about your technology as a where your customer is already a crypto user, or is that the technology backend for your real customer? I think it's just important framing it.
mm.
Thanks, guys.